Hey, everybody, welcome to episode 71 of the Church.digital podcast powered by Stadia Church Planning. Jeff here. I am excited about this conversation, about this episode, really because of how chill this conversation went. It's almost like I'm sitting outside of a Starbucks because really the first time that I met this person, Nils Smith, was outside of a Starbucks. It was actually a very influential day for myself and the Church Digital because we were in Disneyland. Yeah, it's crazy. All magic happens at Disneyland. Everything starts at Disney if you know I'm a Disney guy. But in this situation, there was a very influential day in my life, probably January, February 2018, that involved Nils Smith, who's the guest here on the podcast, Jay Cranda, online pastor with Saddleback, Greg Atkinson, who you'll hear from soon, and Ray DeArmas, who is the digital pastor at Christ Fellowship Miami. Honestly, the five of us were sitting outside of a Starbucks, and we just spent hours, literally hours, talking about what church online could be and how it could make a difference in church and in culture had it been given a chance. And what's ironic is that it took a global pandemic to swing through here to actually get the church to pivot, to adopt to some of these church online principles. And it's so exciting to see how the church is evolving in this season through church online. And so for months, literally for months, I've been trying to get Nils Smith on a podcast here. Nils is a really kind of like this futurist type of guy, innovative. By his own disclaimer, he's not a technology guy. He's really more of just a guy who really is very good at reading culture, looking into the future, anticipating some of the things that are happening. It's one of the reasons why he's a phenomenal conversationalist. So I've been trying to get him on the podcast because he does a lot of podcasts himself. And I've been wanting to do a podcast on church podcasts because I want to see church podcasts get beyond just a sermon. And so for months, just between Nils and I, we've really had a hard time aligning our schedules to have this podcast conversation. And finally things lined up and I was able to get Nils to come in to do this podcast. Lo and behold, we didn't actually talk about the stuff that we're supposed to talk about with church podcasts. Instead, we spent the entire episode talking about COVID, about innovation, about how the church needs to be entrepreneurial in this season to redefine who it is, not from a biblical standpoint, because that stays true, of course, but how we operate and the models with which we work through. This is a lot of what we ended up talking about in this episode. Not at all what I wanted to, but such a deep, rich, thick conversation that I'm sure you're going to get a benefit from it. So here's where we are. We're bringing in Nils Smith, who is Dunham+Company Chief Strategist for Social Media and Innovation, as well as one of the OGs, one of the early pioneers when it comes to church online. At some point, guys, he actually uses the word MySpace in this podcast. Literally, like he was doing church online in MySpace. Just let that sit on you for a while. MySpace. We're bringing in once again Ray DeArmas, of course, co-host here with the Church Digital, digital pastor over at Christ Fellowship Miami, and myself, Jeff, with the Church Digital, as well as Stadia Church Planting, in a conversation that I'm calling a futurist view of innovative entrepreneurial church. Okay, everybody, here you go. Well, awesome, man. Hey, thanks for jumping on this. I know it's a crazy season and life and things like this. And I know we've been trying to do this.
And I'm curious to hear, Jeff, your world has to have blown up and exploded. I mean, I think the timing of you kind of going all in on this and this happening, it's a kind of such a time as this moment for you, it feels like.
Yup.
Yeah, I get that a lot. So traffic on the on my website literally shot up 1,000%.
Yep.
From February to like that second week of March.
Yep.
And it was just crazy. I mean, I'm still getting, and obviously like it's tapered down. The initial thrust was, how do we stream? We have no idea what we're doing, and just jumping from webinar to webinar to webinar to webinar, saying the same thing over and over again with that. And so a lot of content driven towards that. I was already doing the same with Stadia, like going to be the director of digital church planning.
Yeah.
And like the goal was to do this like 3-year ecclesiology or this 3-year research and development project towards creating a digital only church. And I've always been the controversial guy. Like I am not afraid of like hard statements and having people react strongly. I've never seen anything as two-sided, as bifurcated as a digital-only church.
Yeah.
Because there are either people who are like, I have been wanting to do this for a long time. I'm in. How can I be a part of this? And
Yes.
I've had pastors look at me and say, what you are doing is a sin. You are theologically
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
And it's
Amen.
like, and so there's two sides of this, and there's this one guy, and this is a local pastor. This is a friend of mine. Okay, this is a guy who's known me for years. He's
Yeah.
like, Jeff, yeah, I hear what you're doing with like all this broadcasting services and things. I think it's a sin. I think it's wrong. I think you're taking people away from the bride of Christ. You're taking them out of the church, and we will never broadcast the service out of this church.
Wow.
Hey, bro, no problem. Love you. However, I can help your church. Let me know. That was November of 2019. March of 2020. Hey, yeah, we need some help streaming. Can you come over? Can
Yep.
can you help us with this?
Yep.
I would love to. Let me come over. I'm hoping. I don't think as I'm watching the news, like COVID doesn't change the Bible. So like all the theological concerns, that's the Bible hasn't changed, so your theology shouldn't be shifting. Now, maybe your opinions have changed or cultural opinions have shifted as a result of this.
Yep.
I'm hoping that's the answer.
Yep.
But it's
Well, and I
been
think the reality is it's just forced people to do it. And then when they do it, they realize how real it can actually be. And I think that's the big miss from a contextual standpoint of how they perceive it.
Yeah, forgive me, guys, and for jumping into this, but this all comes back to everybody keeps questioning what the definition of what it means to gather together, right? Like this is kind of the whole thing of why people keep questioning it. And now it's funny. Jeff and I had a long private conversation about how a lot of theological shifts were going to happen as a result of this, in terms of what it means to gather, because we can't truly physically be in the same spaces.
Yes.
But at the same time, and folks like you, Nils, Jeff, myself, we've been talking about how, man, it's very easy to gather physically, but still feel completely alone.
Yes.
In a room filled with thousands of people in a church service, still feel completely isolated, feel completely by yourself, as if nobody knows you. And every church says that, well, our answer to that is small groups. And for some reason, when it comes to online, they're still antagonistic towards it. They're like, well, in person, that's where you're gathering, but small groups online, I don't know if you can truly be known. It's like, oh, yes, you can.
Yes. Yes. And I would say personally in my life, we go to a physical connect group at Hillsong, and that's our community, our small group community. But I'll tell you, there are people that I've never met personally that I'm way closer with than the people in my physical small group at church. Because there's a reality when you lean into relationships this way. And I think there's a resistance of course, if you don't use it, you're never going to experience it, and you can't have a legitimate opinion on it either. It's just different though. I mean, it's never been around. This is history. And people are it's hard to contextualize what this is because it didn't exist 2,000 years ago. But yeah, it's such an exciting, crazy day. And I think about what if Facebook didn't exist right now? What if church online platform hadn't been built? Where would the church be without a few people that dealt with you're the crazy nut, and was prepared and set a model for how churches can do this.
Well,
if this.
No,
go ahead, Ray.
I've been telling my dad, because my dad's, an entrepreneur, much like you guys, like a lifelong entrepreneur. And I told him, I said, Dad, we've got to be in the middle of the modern industrial revolution right now. Like that, even, and we can get into futurist stuff, I'm sure, either in this episode or another episode down the road, but so many jobs just either aren't going to be there or aren't going to be the same when people return to the workforce coming out of this, because this whole thing has advanced us, in my opinion, about 10 years in terms of where we were headed. Yeah. Just kind of coming out of it, both in the church and outside of the church. Like everybody 100%. Is saying, oh man, we're not going to be the same coming back into this, in the sense of now we've got new digital avenues. We've got new ways of doing this. But even from an economic standpoint, like things are going to be done way more efficiently coming back because AI is just going to be that much more available.
Yep.
It's really interesting. Like, I've talked to some online pastors in this season, and honestly, they're like, man, we're just going to go back to the way that it was. And
even online pastors are thinking that
even online, and they're discouraged. And I've had conversations with churches. There's a church, several churches I've talked with recently, honestly, that have said the thing like, yeah, I just can't wait to get back to normal. Like, I do hear that.
Yeah.
And so, like, I kind of understand where the online pastors are coming from, or maybe they're feeling that tension, like, within the offices, within the virtual offices at this point, because we're not meeting physically. But it's for me, for some reason, like, I'm very bullish in this season, where I think that this is actually the catalyst that's going to cause change. Ray, I was actually just recently, for some reason, the Ed Stetzer podcast was playing back through. I think I was trying to get a quote or something. Did a podcast with Ed. It was literally like the week before COVID hit. Mm-hmm. It was funny in the podcast. Ed actually mentioned, the entire world's going to change once this COVID thing hit, and Ray and I were like blowing it off, like, yeah, he's just blowing smoke. And holy cow, it really did happen.
Yes.
But even in that conversation, we were talking about, man, every year we talk about how the church needs to change. Mm-hmm. We say we're stuck. We know what we need to do, but there's no catalyst in our life, in the world, to actually cause the change. And then God brings the change. We're literally in the midst of this. We live this hectic lifestyle. We're on lockdown. The church lives in this 1 hour on Sunday, and now it's forced into a position where it has to engage with people 7 days a week. Mm-hmm. Like, it's amazing to see God move in the midst of all of the chaos centered around this COVID season.
Right. And like so many shifts in modern history, right? Like, whether it was the invention of the printing press, and, the Renaissance that comes out of it, and so many different things. Like, either you can embrace it or you can resist it, but either way, change is coming for you. I mean, Nils, you're probably a bigger futurist in this area. Like, what are your thoughts on that? Because to me, that's just the way that it's coming.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. I think I think a lot of us saw this already, but this is, to your point, it's created speed. I think the other thing it's doing is it's speeding up new opportunities, but it's also speeding up the death of, I think there's a lot of churches that they won't come back. Like they're waiting, hoping to survive this season, and they won't survive it because they chose that. And I think too, I mean, I was talking to a guy who works for Lifetime Fitness, and runs kind of this Northeast area. They're having obviously a tough time. Everything's about physical gatherings, but the opportunity that they see is commercial real estate is about to get ridiculously cheap. Mm-hmm. Because people are going to start working remotely. A lot of storefront businesses are going to not survive this. And so there's opportunity across the board, and Lifetime's well positioned. And so while this is a short-term hurt, this is going to be a long-term opportunity. And I think when you can just pull back and just look ahead, there are so many opportunities on it, and I don't know this. I can't state this publicly, but I was talking to a friend who is friends with Lou Giglio, saying that they are realizing they were so focused on their physical gatherings that they don't plan on going back to the way it was. Now, it doesn't mean they're going to not do physical gatherings in the future, but this has forced them to think differently about church in the future. And I think that's happening for a ton of people. Mm-hmm. But I think as an entrepreneur, I see it from a business context of it's, I've just bought a bunch of domains, and because I just see, I'm thinking of new opportunities every hour, that it's like, oh, what is this going to do for work, and online work, and what is this going to do for the financial industry? I'm a part of a healthcare startup that does like Uber for doctors. Well, people are no longer going to want to go to doctor offices in a waiting room where there's a bunch of germs.
No way.
To do telehealth is going to explode. Mm-hmm. Now it's exploding right now, but it will continue. This is the launch pad for telehealth. This is the launch pad. My mom is a psychologist. She thinks she might never have a physical office again. This has launched her into, because even in psychology, you couldn't do the telehealth restrictions were so great. Well, now they've had to open that up because people are depressed and they can't go to a psychologist. So they had to free up psychologists and psychiatrists and everybody to do remote. So yeah, everything is going to be different, and there's a business opportunity, there's a ministry opportunity there. But I think the sad thing is I do think about, and I think it's real, you know, those people that are in their 60s, 70s, and have resisted change, and they just kind of thought was, I'm going to ride this out. And then now they're hitting a point where whatever they were going to ride out no longer exist. That's a tough thing too, you know? And I think there's gotta be a sensitivity to that. And there's a side of me that's like, sorry, you weren't paying attention. We've been talking about this, but there is a side too, where it's like, man, this is going to be tough. I mean, you think about truck drivers and trucks driving themselves, you know, I mean, there's just so many innovations that are happening, and we can see where a lot of it's going. It's getting there a lot faster than I think people thought. Money is not going to be worth the same thing as it was before. I think this is I'm into crypto. I think this is going to expedite crypto. And so, but there's just so much, man. Selfishly, this has been great because I live on airplanes. I think my clients are learning that, you know what, we can actually do a whole lot more through Zoom, and we don't have to pay for your travel. So I don't have to leave my family, and I can do more ministry work, as a consultant. And so, yeah, man, there's so many things I could just go on and on, but that I'm just having a hard time sleeping because I'm so fired up about this season that is so devastating simultaneously.
Yeah.
Yeah. We definitely, it's gasoline on a flame in this COVID season. We were actually talking with mutual friend Jim Toberlin, a podcast, late last year. Mm-hmm. And he was talking about the progression of, like, comparing it to the multi-site movement, of how it was like the cutting edge thing, and then it was the cool thing, and then it was the common thing. It was basically over a progression of about 20 years. It was a cutting edge thing, and then 10 years later it was cool, and then 10 years later it was common. And we were relaying that out to how that would move across church online, where, Life Church, I think, started around 2000, really when it became a cool concept was about 10, 12 years ago. So we're somewhere right now in the middle of, from cutting edge to now the cool idea, where the cool churches are really doing it, but it's not a common thing. As we were talking about how 2029 is the year, we've talked about in podcasts where, like, the AI 10 years from now taking away, X number percentage of jobs. Like 2029 was going to be this like catapulting cultural shift year, where it's going to catalyze the church to really shift into some of these things. And like, COVID wasn't on anybody's radar at all. Oh. And now, we're seeing this happen. It's like, oh, hey, it's common now. What is it, 60? I think I saw Lifeway stat, 61% of churches at this point are broadcasting something online. It's funny. 29% of churches, was a Lifeway stat. I'll link to it in the show notes. But I think this was like Barna. 29% of churches are not growing in this season, or are reporting they're not growing in this COVID season. Ironically, Barna also reports that 29% of churches refuse to do communion online. I don't know that those two are related, but it's this really, it's a fascinating kind of connection that, even some churches aren't willing to embrace the full model, or have like blocks that, oh no, we're not able to do these things.
Yeah.
But these blocks are really the thing that allows us as a church, I think, to engage in online circles.
Yeah. One of my newest church clients is Crossroads Church in Southern California, and gotten to know their pastor, Chuck Boer. I can't say his last name right, but I love him. And I've been listening to him preach for years. But I've just gotten to know him personally, and he said he's always it's been an afterthought, but it's become so real to him. And they had planned for almost a year of this huge baptism service connected to Easter. And then he was like, oh, we've got to scrap that. And then after 2 weeks of doing online, he's like, no, we're doing that, and we're doing it online, and that's going to be very real. So they're doing tons of online baptisms. And it's just fun to see pastors who have leaned in and have allowed themselves to think ecclesiology about how they do church differently. And yeah, and it's exciting, and it's not, yeah, it's just, I'm really eager to see where this lands. And even like Crossroads, I'm curious to see when things are back to whatever our future normal will be. What does that look like? And yeah, things will never, there will never be normal the way it was.
Yeah.
But I think there will be, we're not going to be in isolation the rest of our lives either. And so, yeah, it's just the whole thing, everything's going to be so interesting.
Mm-hmm.
There will be digital churches that will come out of this. Like, and to me, this is the new term that we're using, and Stadia's running with it, and we're helping churches move to this idea of phygital. Yeah, we want to go back to the buildings, and as much as I push this digital only model, the buildings have a place. Interestingly, I was on with Mark Venti yesterday. We were catching up on some things. Mark's the executive pastor, or number 2 guy over at Church Home. And Mark said this line. He's like, Jeff, the buildings work for us. We don't work for the buildings. And it was this fascinating concept where they've even like restricted. They've sold buildings in this season. They still believe in the model of physical buildings, but they're also, going all in on a digital only model. But he was very quick to point out in the conversation, Jeff, we're a phygital church. It's this mixture of physical and digital. You can't really go exclusively one way or the other. And I believe that. Yeah. I think there's an option to do things in a digital church to reach people in a digital way that you may not in a physical realm. And so some of the conversations, that we're even having right now are churches that exist in a physical space that are learning lessons from this season and realizing, hey, more than just doing our physical ministry online, what if we planted and did things differently in the digital space? Yeah. Actually, I talked with a church yesterday, and the executive pastor told me, we asked him, through Stadia, it's like, hey, what are your goals? What do you want to do in the next 2 years? The executive pastor says, our lead pastor's vision in 2 years is to plant the church in VR. And I looked at the executive almost with tears in my eyes, and I was like, wait, you're telling me your lead pastor knows how to spell VR? Like, just stop right there. That's a fascinating concept. And the lead pastor of an organization has a vision to realize there's community in virtual reality. There's an opportunity for me to engage with people differently. DJ Soto, like, let's recreate, let's replicate, let's reimagine these things. Yep. It's a phenomenal opportunity that the church is. If we can just capture that vision and keep it going, the church would look phenomenal if we're learning lessons today that are going to help us for tomorrow.
When I think it's a digital space in comparison to a physical space. And so one of the concepts, like, I'm working with Transformation Church in Tulsa, and they consider themselves first a digital church that happens to have a location in Tulsa. And this is a new mindset shift that they've made that Mike Todd has had for years, but the church around, everybody else never really got until now. But they see the really defining Facebook as a campus, YouTube as a campus. And we're looking at Twitch right now, so Twitch would be, and we're trying to say, what is that community like as we go into the Twitch community? We don't want to just do it our way. We want to be a part of the Twitch community and create a community that's native to their platform and the way they form community. And so it's fascinating to think about their multi-site strategy is platforms, not necessarily the internet.
Right.
And then they come together in just like a multi-site church. You might have gatherings where your 3 or 4 physical campuses come together for special events, or has unified pastoral leadership and things like that. But yeah, we have no idea what Church Home is fascinating. Mark is not a technology guy. Mark's a pastor who is, and I think the less he knows about technology, the better, because he thinks about it from a pastoral mindset.
Right.
And he asks the technology people to align the technology to the church's vision. And it serves them, the technology serves them just like the buildings serve them, as just a tool to accomplish the purposes of the church.
Good. Nils, why do you think it is that businesses, and granted, entrepreneurs tend to be ahead in this kind of thing, but a lot of businesses like Home Depot and others have embraced the fact that, hey, look, the buildings serve us. So we're going to invest a lot more in this online space because we want things to be completely cohesive, but we recognize that, hey, if it's not profitable or if it's not really moving us in the right direction, then we're okay with cutting our losses and moving on. Why do you think it's so hard for the church to do that?
I think people actually misperceive how far ahead the business community is because a handful of businesses are very innovative. The reality is I've gotten more and more into consulting on the corporate side as well. The corporate moves slow. A lot of corporate moves slow, and we saw Toys R Us go out of business because they moved slow and they leaned into Amazon put their business out of business. And I think, and you're seeing that happen so much to folks and think about, I mean, I think early days of Amazon, they were a digital bookstore that everybody laughed at, and they put all those companies out of business. And so a handful of innovative leaders and companies have thrived in this changing landscape, but 10x that in the companies that said that laughed at it and blew it off. And so the church isn't the only entity to move slow. I think just people's nature is to lean into comfort. People's nature is to lean into what they know and what they've known. And I think there are some of us that just are wired differently. And I think I've learned, like, there's a side where my wife has had to tell me, like, other people aren't lazy. You're just a workaholic. Does that make sense? Like, I'm wired differently. And I think it's normal. And that's where I think this is a moment for innovative leaders to stand out and lead their organizations differently. And those that and there are leaders that want to just settle. Does that, and I say settle like and move slower, and that's healthy to a point, but that worked in a season. But we're moving into a season where change is more necessary at a rapid state. And I even think about, like, I've done some parenting webinars this last year, or even some live speaking events where people are asking about social media and their families, and they're like, oh, it's going to be okay because they said radio was going to ruin kids and television was going to ruin kids. And none of that ruined kids. But the reality is the internet has moved way faster than television ever did. And we could monitor that way easier. Now, I actually believe you can monitor the internet more than you can monitor those things if you're smart. But most parents aren't smart enough to be able to monitor it like you can. And people have access to more than they've ever had. So I think the rate of innovation, and it's not like we're going to get here and it's going to stop. It's only going to get faster and faster and faster. And AI is going to build things themselves. It's, as you get into the future of AI, it is as scary as I think people make it out to be in their minds. And I think that's where the government's got to get ahead of it too, of like, how do we govern this new world that's being created around us? And I think then the reality is life is going to get easier. Houses are going to build themselves. Cars are going to drive themselves. Groceries are going to be delivered, our lives. And then that brings down the cost of everything. And so people can actually then just function as things that only people can do in creativity and in creative thought and in relational, connection. But our minds, it's hard to, there's a long tangent on, how why churches move slow, but I think the bottom line is it's human nature to move slow, and it's the rest of us that think everybody's moving slow are just workaholics and people that see we're the weird ones at the end of the day. But I'm glad to be a weird one, especially in this moment.
There's a tension with that though, right? Because like I've even heard, I would say Craig Groeschel is by far one of the most innovative pastors in America today. I'd put him in a room of three. I don't want to discredit some of the other guys, but Life Church obviously is doing some incredible things. Bobby Grunwald and the team, awesome, phenomenal. By the way, thank you. You are not listening to this podcast, but if you were, thank you very much. Not for listening, for doing what you're doing. I'm not that much of an ego guy. But here's the thing. Like, I've even heard Groeschel talk, at the most recent what is the Willow Creek, the leadership, what do they call that, the
summit,
the summit, the leadership summit, thank you, coronavirus brain,
global leadership summit, thank you. He used the phrase Gitmo. He literally is talking about, at some point it just has to be good enough to move on, and so, like, the tension of, okay, I want to change the world, but at some point the perfectionist is actually going to stop me from being able to do the thing that I'm really trying to accomplish, and so get it done at the point that you can let it go. It's good enough to move on. And for me, as a and I heard that, and when COVID hit, that was when Gitmo triggered for me in a new way, because for me, I'm looking at, holy cow, my website just increased 1,000%. I'm going to have to make some changes because I have to, there's just so much more impact and potential. I have to let go of things. I have to ask others to come on board with me. We went from I went from one writer in 2019 December to probably 25, 30 different writers writing content for me in the COVID season. We onboarded 25 people easy. I can't even count. I can go back, but I don't know what the number is. Like, I'm literally like, hey, nice to meet you. You want to write a blog? This will be great. Come on. And it was a phenomenal opportunity.
Yep.
But part of that is because I realized that the lid of the Church Digital in that season was me. And I could control it. I could regulate it. I could make sure my hands were on every piece of it. But to do that, I would become literally the flesh, the lid of this thing. But if I were to step back, if I were to let others be involved in the process, the thing would grow much faster because it wasn't dependent on me. Yeah. And so I think that the church has an opportunity, I think, maybe even to release a little bit. Like, this is the conversation I would love to have with the Groeschels and the Grunwalds. What's your relationship like? Over the past decade, when Bobby comes in with some crazy idea, what's the response? What's that conversation look like? What's the push back and forth? How have you figured out? Because you're both strong leaders, you're both driven. Somehow they've managed to figure out how to release the tension, figure out how to work, and as a result, that organization has skyrocketed in ways that churches maybe haven't. So there's an opportunity, I think, to learn here. Go ahead, Nils.
I think there's and I think they're such a great case study for an organization that leaned into innovation and have seen the fruits of leaning in early to innovation, and they're so well positioned too to where things are going because of that. They're not capped. They just literally took the lid off 10 years ago. And I think it happens for a couple of reasons. And I think some of the mistakes I see is there's such a high level of trust between Bobby and Craig that's essential. I think there's also, I've yet to see an organization thrive, especially in the online space, without a senior pastor or senior leader or lead pastor who at least has a vision for it. It doesn't mean they've got to be technology minded. And I don't think Craig, I've not even met Craig. I've been in some rooms with him, but I don't think that he's a technology guy. I think he is an incredible visionary that is kind of just like, whatever pushes the gospel forward, I'm going to lean in. And Bobby has been his guy that he's like, I trust that guy. And so I'll drive it and lead it from a vision standpoint, but I need you to create the structure for it. And what I see some pastors who are like, yeah, I want to go reach the world online, and I'm going to go get my 25-year-old youth pastor because he seems techie to figure out how to do it. And then that guy creates a mess. Or and I think about me when I was 25 and I knew everything, and I'm like, why won't my senior pastor just give me the keys to everything? And the reality is, if you throw the keys to that 25-year-old, he might be smart, but he or she is 25. Like there's just natural immaturity that just comes, or maturity that comes with age, and so I think you've got to have trust, and trust is built over years, and it's lost in a moment. And so I think any organization that is going to thrive, it has to have multiple people driving innovation. It cannot be just one person. The top person has to be bought in, and they have to have people they deeply trust, that will go along for the journey. But the organizations, I mean, this is a leadership conversation outside of a technology conversation. When I've been a part of, and I've worked with organizations where the senior pastor doesn't trust the people around them, and he feels the need to, or she feels the need to do everything themselves, you're capped. You're immediately capped when you don't have a core leadership team that you trust.
Yeah. Can you speak into, Nils, the cost of innovation too? Just because, there was tremendous time cost, there's tremendous, like you're saying, trust costs to do things like what Life Church did that we're talking about, like the open network, for instance, or even YouVersion, like offering that for free from the get-go.
Yes.
They embraced the internet of free early on. Like I remember reading about that in Wired, like back in 2007, like, man, the internet of free, how that's going to become a thing. And I was like, oh, wow. Like, and here it is. A church was embracing that early on, to the point where they're giving away church online platform for free. Like, but tremendous cost, tremendous hours, all that in the background. Thoughts on that?
Yeah. Mike Todd has become one of my favorite people in the world. My wife is like, your man crush on Pastor Mike. Chill. And I met him probably 6 months ago, and that's where my crush began. My crush maybe began from a distance before that. But he shared with me his story of where, it's so transparently, but 5 years ago, they were a church plant. They had about 150 people, and they met in a storefront, and he said, God gave me a vision that we need to buy cameras and lean into our video, and social media. And so he's like, I want, anyways, they made an investment at $80,000 as a church plant to buy these nice cameras, because he was thinking about, what is this, it was because he felt like God called him, to do that. He had about 50 people leave his church. That's like 30% of his congregation, because they felt like he was immature and was not being a good steward of the church resources by making that decision. Well, today, their church, and I was working with the Easter services. They just literally bought a new building, cash, a 4,000 seat auditorium, and they moved in, and now they can't meet there. But at Easter, and I was texting with Pastor Mike, and at Easter, they had 40 times the people gathered online in their live stream than could fit in their room. Wow. And so you talk about a good investment 5 years ago. Financially, their giving is up, almost 20% since the COVID crisis started, because they leaned in early. There is a cost with innovation, and the cost is sometimes financial. The cost is sometimes people. The cost is people calling you crazy, Jeff, that. And so I don't, I still remember when I was at Community Bible Church, early days of like, are you really encouraging people to get on Facebook? Like, why do you want people to get a divorce? And I was like, how did you correlate me encouraging our church to use Facebook to, I want people to get a divorce? Now, he did because somebody in his small group had gotten a divorce because they connected with an old spouse. There are dangers. There are things that, as we lead new things, so the cost is generally way more than money. It's often a lot of time. And then it's also just leadership equity that you have to earn. You cannot just say, I've got this title and I'm going to guide. And that comes with casting a clear vision, and then taking some risks. And they always say, if you don't fail, you're not innovating fast enough. You have to have freedom to fail, and expectation that failure is a part of leading into innovation. And I think for some churches, you don't have to lean into innovation. Sometimes you can be the second person there. Life Church is already led, and it doesn't mean you need to copy Life Church, but learn from, and Bobby would be the first person to tell you that they've made a lot of mistakes along the way. And that's where they so transparently put stuff out there to like say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do that, because we learned, and we don't want you to make those mistakes. We'll let you catch up faster, because you came second. And so some want to get there first. There's a huge cost with going first, but I think there's a huge expense in going third. I think going second is probably one of the best places for most leaders to be leading when it comes to innovation.
I love that because, yeah, absolutely. Because so often when I worked in Apple retail, I kept telling people, they were like, man, isn't it so great? Apple's leading the way. And I was like, no, they're not first to market with anything.
Yeah.
I was like, they weren't first to market with a smartphone. They weren't first to market with a media player. They weren't first to market with a laptop. They're better. That's all it is. They're better than the people who were first to market. So other people may walk through that door first, and every Android user in the universe is probably saying amen right now. They're like, the Simpsons did it. Like they're the people who are like, we did it first. But Apple just has this way of, okay, cool. You did something great. We're going to try and just take that innovation and work it into our system and make it better. And that's kind of where they've made their fame in the last few years.
That's so good. I mean, and I think do it well too. I mean, I think leaning into excellence, is one of the keys there. And I think too many churches have tried to copy Life Church online, and it's like, be you and learn from their core principles. And I think in Apple is very clear on who they are. They don't put out bad products. They don't put out, even when Steve Jobs put everything needs to fit on one table is what he used to say. And so they're like, we're going to do these things really well. And so I just left Apple because I'm bored with how second they are. But at the end of the day, I'm frustrated because my Android stuff and my Chromebook stuff is buggy because they're kind of going first in different areas. And Apple is going to do it right. And I think that there's a winning strategy in going second, but there's a fun strategy for some to go first. And Mike Todd is going first. And he's gonna have some scars by going first, but he's gonna see some incredible fruit. Jeff Bezos went first. He's got some scars, I guarantee you. There's fruits there, but there are plenty of other people that just watched Amazon and kind of rode those coattails to like, look, I can just watch what Bezos is doing right now and just do that in 2 years, and be good. And that's what Walmart is essentially doing. Walmart's just riding Amazon's coattails, just copying their business model with the infrastructure they already had in place. And so, and I think Walmart is probably the perfect example for churches to say, we're a traditional business that was very successful, that has looked at where things are going. And we have adapted and adjusted without completely abandoning our old. But I'd be willing to bet that in the next 5 years, you're going to see half the Walmarts that you see today. But their business is thriving more than it ever has.
So this has been a fascinating conversation on the innovative entrepreneurial church. This is not at all what I wanted to talk about, but that's what makes this so much better. We'll bring you back to have the podcast conversation. By the way, I love the fact that you've abandoned Apple, or at least are thinking about abandoning Apple. I've taken a lot of heat because I'm an Apple fanboy who, as I hold my Apple Pencil in my finger, writing on an iPad here, I myself am frustrated because the luster is gone. But similar to you, the other stuff's just not good enough for me to actually endorse and run with 100%. So I'm still a blue bubble. Down. It does. I'm not a green bubble, people. Like, relax. I'm not there yet. But I'm to this point where I'm like, I'm not really feeling the blue bubble anymore. So that's another conversation. We'll bring it back to that. I really want to focus on this.
Yeah.
Because you've used the word, because there's a small church out there who has heard you use the word, here's innovation, who hears excellence, who hears Life Church, who hears all of these big words. Dude, I'm a 250 person church. My camera is maybe a Mevo. How am I supposed to compete with that? Let's drill on that. How does a small church compete? That's their mindset. How do I compete with Life Church?
And that's why I think that the Transformation Church story is so powerful, in that they were 5 years ago a 200 member, church plant, and Mike cast a vision for this camera equipment and prioritizing online, because that's going to be their front door. And then that also expanded into their kind of multi-site strategy, all kinds of other things. But they saw that as their front door from a giving standpoint. And Transformation has been unbelievably transparent in their first year. That they had like $1.5 million budget, which is great for a church plant, and they grew very fast early on. Then after they bought those cameras, their budget dropped to like 1.2 million, I think, because people left. And then the next year was about 3 million, and then the next year was about 8 million, and then the next year was I think this last year was like over 20 million given. They bought a building cash. This was a 5-year-old church. Now that came with Mike listened to God. Mike led with a clear vision, and he continued to push. And I mean, I think I give so much credit to God blessing that unique situation and the movement of God. But I also, Mike listened to God, right, and leaned in, and God moved. That doesn't mean every church is going to be, and you shouldn't just follow the transformation model. But I think it starts with having a vision. And I think I just did a Facebook Live or live stream before this of a friend of mine just has been speaking the word exponential into me. And honestly, I've gone charismatic since I started going to Hillsong. And so there's a guy who just kind of spoke a prophetic word over me. And that word exponential has kind of been the word I've leaned into this year. And somebody spoke it to me yesterday, and it kind of restirred of we're in a moment where everyone can be rethinking everything. And if you're in this assembly line of just feeling stuck or what do we do next, this is the perfect moment to say, we're going to do things different. And it doesn't mean you need to go to an online campus, but I think a lot of pastors and ministry leaders have stopped listening to God, and they've just said, I'm going to do church and I'm going to pray. But praying means I'm going to pray for my congregation. Praying means I'm going to just pray for you to bless my efforts with the church, and the church the way I do church, and the way that Saddleback does church, because I follow the purpose-driven model. I think these models are great, but where is God calling your church? And it might be to lead it and be stable and just die over the next 20 years. That might be your calling. I don't know. But I believe that there is a ministry opportunity that exists online. And it might be to, I helped a church recently plant a church in Iran exclusively on the internet. They can't plant it. I mean, there are house churches and things that you can plant, but it's a digital church in Iran. And they do digital small groups, and they do digital worship gatherings through StreamYard. And there are literally people in Iran that are a part of the service, and people outside of Iran that are a part of the service. There are opportunities that didn't exist. You couldn't have done that a couple of years ago, and the internet wasn't fast enough there in Iran a couple of years ago. And so there are so many opportunities for a leader to just pull back right now and pray, and just say, and I think what Mike said, Mike had a vision to reach the world. I'll tell you, this is, I'll get personal here. When I started online church at CBC with onlinechurch.com, I had a very clear vision that I believe was from God of a worship gathering that's going to, and I've never shared this publicly, I don't think, but that there will be people from every country and territory around the world in a worship gathering, and at the same time. And I don't think that's ever happened. And I believe that in the next year to 2 years, we will actually see that moment happen. And it seemed so impossible to me 10 years ago. Today, it seems so possible. And that's a vision, because I in that moment, I was listening to God. And I've been kind of like, even a lot of the things in the leaders I've invested into, the more I hear somebody casting a vision for that, that's where I align as a consultant of like, I want to get next to you and help guide you towards that vision. But there are other people that have a different vision from God and a different calling from God. And it might be a different direction. I just think a lot of people haven't leaned into the internet because because honestly, they're not leaning into God. And it doesn't mean God's going to call everyone to the internet. I think though, we put God in a box of the box of a church and a church building, and we do worship, and I'm a Saddleback guy. I went to Rockbridge Seminary, and so it's like we do worship, we do, small groups, we do, missions, and we do it in this way. Well, the reality is, if you take the 5 purposes of Saddleback and, Rick Warren's purpose-driven church, it all fits into the internet. It fits into, you can do worship online, you can do small groups online, you can fellowship online, you can do discipleship online, you can do missions online. The internet is just another tool. So I think there's just so many opportunities, and I think pastors are not leaning into the opportunity. And I might be overstating it to say the pastors aren't listening to God, but I believe that there's so much opportunity there. And I think there are some digital missionaries out there that don't yet have and are scared to take that leap that God might be pushing on them. And I think this moment that we're all sitting in is probably stirring a lot of those people. And I hope that they will. It's going to get hard. Does that make sense? It might be fun right now, but as you lean in, and if people aren't calling you crazy, I don't think you're leaning in hard enough.
Right.
And so I just want to see some pastors, and it doesn't mean they have to have a physical. I'd rather see some, Jeff, even to your point of, I'd rather see some just say, I'm going to plant a digital church. And if we end up having physical gatherings, cool. If we don't, we're going to start on Twitch, and the Twitch is going to be our first campus. Or we're going to start on Facebook, or we're going to, whatever it might be. But yeah, I just think there's so many, and we just haven't even thought of the Facebook. When I started onlinechurch.com, Facebook, I don't think video was even possible yet on Facebook back then, and then Facebook Live. I mean, you can get an iPhone, and anybody can start a church tomorrow. And a church, at the core is just people gathering, it's people in community. You don't have to have a license to start a church.
Well, from one crazy guy to another crazy guy. Thanks for being crazy. It's been a crazy run. By the way, I'm gonna do a little commercial here. If you are interested in planting a digital church or any of the stuff that Nils was just talking about, I do apologize for the commercial. Stadia, we're literally recruiting digital church planners to do exactly what my man's talking about. So, looking at your circle of influence and what you're passionate about, figuring out how to utilize that passion to reach, disciple, and grow. Yeah, an ecclesiological model of church in a digital space. It's possible. You can do it. Nils,
so Jeff, tell me how Stadia comes along. So if a pastor says, I want to plant a digital church, how does Stadia come alongside a pastor to do that?
I am glad you asked. Thank you for that, Nils. So right now, we're actually in the process of developing some digital learning communities where we're literally taking we're developing a lineup of pastors to be part of this, of innovators, a lot of the people that have been on this podcast, and others, to come in here and speak as part of this learning community. For about 6 months, we're looking at taking people through hitting things like how to be digital, how to staff digital pastor mean. How do you get the entire staff to be invested and engaged in a phygital mindset, digital and physical? What does it mean, Target, to work with digital community? How do you create a small group that's reproducing itself? What does discipleship making mean digitally? What are the challenges? How do you overcome the coldness of technology with Christ? How do you create a disciple maker in the space? All sorts, man. The speakers we've got coming in. I'm just gonna tell you this. Go to stadiachurchplanning.org/phygital, PHYGITAL. I totally appreciate the nod there, Nils. It wasn't necessary, but anytime I get to talk about Stadia, I love doing that, and I'm excited about what's happening there. So if you're wrestling with this space, would love to have you in there. And aside from even churches, because as part of helping churches understand how to be phygital, understanding churches how to plant digital only, that's part of the process that we're doing. Another part that we're doing really is working with individuals, people who are not connected with churches, who are saying, I have a passion about an area. A guy's like, man, I'm really into alt VR, and I'm thinking about what would it be like to be another DJ Soto doing a VR church. Well, we want to come alongside you and help in that. And so, like, a lot of this is not let's help on the church side, because I think the churches need to understand this to resource individuals. But part of what we're also doing is resourcing individuals to helping them understand what that is, and helping them grow. And even more than, the phrase is thrive, grow, and multiply. We want to help churches understand how to thrive, grow, and multiply. We also want to help individuals who are interested in planting their own thing thrive, grow, and multiply through that. So either way, hit me up. My information's in the show notes, and Stadia, we would love to have a conversation with you on that. Totally was not anticipating going in commercial.
By the way,
Digital, yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
It's and I it's funny. I'm actually trying to remember where it came from. It's a business phrase. Like, it's one of those things that I think the business world's a little ahead of us, the church side. Maybe not as far, to your point, as we think they are, but they are ahead. And so the combination of physical and digital merging together. We're phygital people, especially coming out of this COVID season. We are going to be very phygital people. And so utilizing churches, understanding how to it's not about the services, but about how to utilize the phygital to disciple someone, to be involved in their life 7 days a week, to help them grow deeper, to empower them to utilize the digital technology, to connect with others, to disciple more people, to get them connected in God in a new way. We had this, and it's a podcast we did recently with Tyler Sansom, and I had never thought of this. Tyler's like, hey, so one of the things we do between services and small groups, to just meet people, get them connected, kind of in a welcoming area. The feature on Netflix where it's like the watch party, where you can like watch the same Netflix video all at the same time. So they opened it up to like people, hey, if we're doing family movies, if you want to jump on Netflix, do the watch party thing, come in. He had 20 families sign up to watch movies together. And so they're building relationships, they're talking. Some of them might be Christian, some of them might not be. It doesn't matter. They're building relationships. And then when it's time to actually, one of the weeks, hey, maybe we're not going to show a movie this week. Maybe we'll jump on Zoom and talk about what God's doing in our lives. And some of them may have stories, some of them may not, but it's an opportunity to relationally invest in people to get to that point. And it's like, if Netflix doesn't exist, try to get 20 people in a room like that to build relationships. You really can't. Yes. 40, 60, like there's no limit on that, unless Netflix has got limitations, I don't know. But at the end of the day, like, you're utilizing technology not to compete with the weekend service, but to complement it, to do something that only the technology can do. And to me, this is where, and we're not even, as a church, we're not even utilizing technology in this way yet. We haven't figured it out. We're so afraid of it because it's competing with the 1 hour on Sunday that we don't want to actually take advantage of the power to relational connect with it.
It's incredible too when you think about, and I love this phygital where you can interact, but you think about the complexity and one of the things transformation is dealing with is having a 4,000 seat auditorium. Getting people in and out of a physical service is really complicated. And the funny thing, and Robert Emmett used to always say this with onlinechurch.com, is he's like, look, we don't have to have security guards. We kind of have digital security guards that ban people, but it's not so complex. We don't run out of parking. We don't have to figure out how we get 30 minutes to people leave a service and then new people to come in. And we don't care if people double dip on the online services like we do in the physical services. And there's just so much opportunity. And I think, I get excited too, if there is not a locked in model. One of the visions I really have for churches that I don't see happening much yet is house churches coming out of it. And I think that's where Church Home is going in a lot of ways, but where you kind of have these micro gatherings that start you have a cluster in Ohio and you have a cluster in Pakistan, and you have a cluster in Sydney, and you have a cluster, 50 miles away from your church building where people just don't want to drive, but they want to gather, or people that don't want to go into a big auditorium anymore because of COVID, and they'd rather just be in a living room and watch church on a television and then eat lunch together and be in like a different kind of community, yet they want it from a teaching standpoint. I believe the pulpit drives the church. And I think online church allows that pastor to be able to speak into those homes. And I think in many ways we I think even back to the rabbinical days of you would choose a rabbi to follow, and I think we still do that. We choose a pastor of, this is the person that I want to speak into my life spiritually, and I want to follow from a teaching standpoint as the primary person speaking into my life spiritually. And now that's no longer limited by geography. And you as a pastor are no longer limited by geography. And me as an individual am no longer limited by geography of who I choose to speak into my life spiritually. And these are the new opportunities that are not a limitation to church or a distraction from church, but are only an enhancement. And it doesn't mean you have to reach the world. It does mean you can reach the people within 20 miles, even more than you could before, and be even more connected. There's just so many things. I love Phygital. I tried to go buy Phygital.church and saw you already bought Phygital.church, so you beat me.
Don't buy my domain. I'm already there. That's awesome.
I was gonna sell it back to you. I was just looking for an upsell opportunity.
The funny thing was, I bought that. It's so funny. I bought that like 3 months, like 2019.
Yeah.
Because I'm like you. I buy domains randomly, come back around, whatever. And so 2019, I bought that domain, and I'm talking with Stadia. February, March, it was in this COVID season, 2020. We're talking about Phygital and working through. It's like, hey, let's push all in on this term. And I went to buy Phygital.church, not remembering I already bought it. And so I went to buy it in GoDaddy, and it came back and said already bought. And I'm like, well, crap, who's smart enough to actually be planning ahead? And so I go into Whois, look it up, I was like, oh, I bought it 4 months ago and didn't even remember.
You forgot that you bought it.
I forgot I even bought it. So that's welcome to my COVID life.
Are you willing to admit how many domains that you have in your? Are you a GoDaddy guy? What do you use your domains?
Yeah, so I'm a GoDaddy guy. I'm 3 figures. I'm not 4 figures.
You're in the three figures though.
I am 3 figures. I keep it in context. Honestly, I like my industry, bad word, my zone, the area of influence is church. So I don't really even let myself go outside of that.
Yeah.
And
the 3 figures.
Yeah, I am. Lots of buzzwords, lots of keywords, lots of things coming up. I've a couple clients I do stuff for, but that's on a minimal. I don't want to my worst fear is I forget to renew a domain for a client that's like there, and so like I'm as much as possible. Hey, let me set you up with an account. I'll do the initial purchase for you, so you get the discounts, and then I'll just hand it to you.
Yeah, that's
good. But
I love it.
Anyway, this is fine. It's a great conversation, man. I love you. We got together. I was reminded of this, and we're gonna talk about this later, because we're doing a podcast with Craig Atkinson.
Yeah.
Later this afternoon, outside of Starbucks, maybe 3-4 years ago.
Disneyland.
Yeah, Disneyland. With Nils, Jay Cranda, Ray was there, and Greg Atkinson, just talking crazy. And to see 3-4 years later, whatever the math was, how crazy's become a reality, and how churches are now wrestling with this in real time, trying to figure out how to adjust. Man, thanks for what you're doing. One of the questions, we do want to bring you back. One of the questions that I wanted to ask even was, man, you were one of the pioneers in this, and so 10, 20 years ago, did you, just real briefly, did you see this coming, or was it did you realize that the church would be in the season where this would become a reality, or were you pushing vision, just hoping to get close to it?
And I'm going to give you a longer answer because I think my story I think might even inspire someone else. I'm an accidental in all of this. I'm not a technology guy. In 1999, I was a youth pastor. My first youth ministry gig, I was introduced to AOL Instant Messenger, and that's where my online ministry began. That was my first day of youth ministry. A 7th grade girl introduced me to AOL Instant Messenger. And so from my first day of ministry, all I knew was digital and physical. And my most successful ministry came out of digital relationships that I then merged into physical relationships. And that just went into MySpace, and then that went into Facebook. And then, about 12 years ago, I was leading a college service, and we had about 75 college students that gathered, and somebody introduced me to this platform called Mogulus, where you can plug in your handy cam to your computer. And now it's livestream.com, which is now owned by Vimeo. But it was like, I can do this and I can live stream this service anywhere. We literally had 1,000 people that night watch our service on Mogulus because somebody told me to plug in a camera, and I was willing to try it. And we told everybody, update your Facebook and your MySpace with this link. And then we started reaching the world. And then, so I was willing to try things. And when I would see something, I'd be like, oh, I'm going to lean into this. And then I got in the newspaper in San Antonio, which is where Robert Emmett heard about me. And Robert Emmett took me to lunch, and he's like, we've planted 10 churches, and I'm just tired of the headache of planting new churches. Do you think we could do a church on the internet? And I said, I'd love to try to figure it out. So I would say he had a vision. I was fascinated by Life Church. And we literally just figured out how to do church. Like, well, what about small groups? Well, what about prayer? What about baptism? What about, and we just figured it out one step at a time. So I would say I didn't have a vision for this. I had a willingness to try new things, and God gave me vision along the way. And God gave Robert Emmett vision as our lead pastor. And I helped him accomplish his vision. And now as a consultant, that's what I choose clients who have a vision I want to align to, and help them create structure to accomplish their vision. So that's my journey into this. But I didn't have a clear vision, and I don't have a clear vision for the future, but I want to continue to be a part of, willing to try new things to see. And I think I love Craig Gershell's line, anything short of sin to accomplish the gospel or further the gospel. I don't know exactly the thing, but anything. And for me, it has been, the fruits have been when I've leaned into technology innovation.
That was awesome. Thank you for that. Man, well said. I love the fact that you used the word AOL and MySpace in a conversation. Like
I was Nils BYX, by the way.
BYX?
Nils BYX was my AOL IM name. Brothers
Under Christ?
Yep, Brothers Under Christ.
Very good.
Nice.
I'm with you. So yeah, wow, that's a throwback.
Yeah.
What school? You were in Texas?
Yeah, I was at it was Southwest Texas State University. I think I've got my shirt on.
TSU. Okay, all right, well done.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. So I was Brothers Under Christ at TCU.
Oh,
there
TCU.
we go. What
Nice.
year did you graduate? Listen, I'm going to cut all this out. So or maybe I'll leave it in. I don't know. But what year did you graduate?
2002.
2002. Okay, I was 99. All right, very cool. I didn't realize that. I
You
mean,
were
I could do like the
early days of Bucks.
Oh my gosh, I can't. In one spirit, in one voice, we sing our it's been 20 years since I've tried to remember that.
Next time we see each other physically.
Very good. I'll definitely get you in. And Ray's like, these bunch of old guys are freaky right now. So
you guys are part of like an Elks Club or like a Stonehenge, group that I don't know about, man. Some kind of secret society Mason stuff. It's good. I love it.
So evidently, if you're a boxer, you are a shaved head and have a goatee, because evidently that's what we're establishing here in this podcast. Well,
and it's built into your AOL screen name. It's built in.
It had to be. I almost got a Bucks tattoo. I'm kind of glad I didn't, but I almost went that far.
Yeah, I was not that radical. Well done. Awesome. Hey, Ray, I don't know how you're going to make sense of this, but as we're landing the plane, any closing thoughts?
No, I'm so glad, Jeff. You got to throw a pipe organ in the background of when Nils was preaching there, because I was about to get rolling with him. And for so long, we prayed for Acts 2, right? Like I heard churches over and over again praying for revival and talking about, man, we want to see a revival happen. And just maybe, what if we're living in it right now? Like, would we actually open our eyes to like look at the fields like Jesus said and say, hey, man, the harvest is here. And it's not in a way that we expected. Maybe a lot of it's going to come digitally. And maybe if we would embrace, like what Nils said so eloquently, and I love this, the vision that God has for us, instead of trying to copy somebody else. Like what if Paul had the ability to say, hey, Jesus, I can't physically get to Macedonia, but you gave me this camera and you gave me this computer, and every other way I keep coming up to walls, but through this way, I can get into that 1040 window. I can preach the gospel. I can get it to people. There's a relevant method here if we would just embrace this time for what it is. Sorrows, heartaches, but also the positive things that come with it. there's so much beauty that could come from this, man.
Well said, well said. Yeah, and we'll have to get the sound effect of the pipe organ in here. That's a good idea. You're totally listening to the pipe organ right now, because I'm going on faith that I'm going to work it in right about at this point. Okay, Nils, thank you, Ray. Nils, is landing the plane. Any closing thoughts on your side?
I just want to say I love you guys. I love the relationship we've had through the years online, and the work you're doing right now in leading this conversation. It's special, and it's important, and it's critical, and I appreciate you letting me be a part of the conversation.
So the podcast I wanted to have was, man, the church needs to figure out how to utilize long form audio better, because we want to hear something other than a sermon. So, and this is, according to Gary Vee, 2020 is the year of long form audio. So church, let's get a clue and figure out how to create long form audio. I hope you enjoyed the conversation we did not have. Instead, we dove into this innovative entrepreneurial church model, or just what a church would look like if it was innovative and entrepreneurial. So thank you for this conversation.
Yep.
We'll have to bring you back another time and actually get into the audio piece, because I would love your angle on that. And so we'll get there. For Ray, for Nils, this is Jeff with the Church Digital. Once again, thanks for jumping on the podcast, and we'll see you next time here on the show. You all have a good day.